The night I quit my job, I thought I was finally free. For 3 years, my life had revolved around endless meetings, impossible deadlines, and the quiet pressure of working under a man who seemed to demand perfection from everyone around him. I walked out of that glass building in downtown Chicago with a cardboard box in my hands, and the strange feeling that I had just stepped out of a storm. The city lights looked different that night, softer somehow, like the world was finally letting me breathe again. But I had no idea that the storm wasn't over. 2 weeks later, on a cold Thursday evening, someone knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. Standing there in a dark overcoat, looking completely out of place in the narrow hallway of my modest building, was my former CEO, Marcus Whitaker. And the first thing he said was something I would never forget. "You left the office," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight I had never heard before. But not me. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, because stories like this remind us that even the hardest chapters can lead to something beautiful. 2 weeks earlier, quitting had felt like the only option I had left. I had joined Whitaker Industries straight out of college. Back then, I was just a hopeful 24-year-old named Ryan Carter, fresh from Ohio, chasing the kind of career that looked impressive on paper, but slowly drained the life out of the people living it. The company was one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country, and Marcus Whitaker was its legendary founder. People in the business world described him as brilliant, ruthless, and unstoppable. To me, he was simply the man who seemed to expect the impossible from everyone around him. I worked under the operations department, led by a tough but fair manager named Kevin Brooks. Kevin used to joke that surviving at Whitaker Industries required 3 things: caffeine, patience, and the ability to work while half asleep. At first, I loved it. The long nights felt like proof that I was building something meaningful. My coworkers became like family. There was Olivia Grant from marketing, who always brought homemade cookies on Fridays. There was Ethan Caldwell, the quiet developer who could fix any problem in minutes. And then there was Marcus Whitaker, rarely seen but always felt. The moment he walked into a room, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. But over time, the excitement turned into exhaustion. Weeks blurred into months. I missed birthdays, family dinners, and even my sister's graduation. The company kept growing, and so did the pressure. One night around midnight, while staring at my computer screen in an almost empty office, something inside me finally broke. I realized I had become a stranger to my own life. The next morning, I walked into Kevin's office and placed a resignation letter on his desk. He looked at it for a long moment before sighing softly. "You're not the first good one to burn out," he said quietly. But the surprising part wasn't Kevin's reaction. It was Marcus Whitaker's. An hour later, I received an email from the CEO's office asking me to meet him personally. Everyone in the company knew that almost never happened. When I stepped into his office on the top floor, I expected anger, maybe disappointment. Instead, he just studied me quietly. Marcus Whitaker was older than I expected up close. His hair had started turning silver at the temples, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that the business magazines never showed. "You're one of our best analysts," he said calmly. "Why leave now?" I told him the truth. I told him I was tired. I told him the job had taken over my entire life. I told him that somewhere along the way I stopped recognizing the person I was becoming. For a moment he didn't respond. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said. That was it. No argument, no persuasion, just a quiet acceptance. I left the building feeling relieved, certain that chapter of my life was closed forever. But 2 weeks later, Marcus Whitaker was standing at my apartment door. I stepped aside awkwardly and let him in. My apartment wasn't exactly what you'd expect a former employee to invite a billionaire CEO into. The couch was old, the kitchen was tiny, and the walls were mostly bare except for a few photos of my family. Marcus looked around slowly, like he was seeing a different world. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. He nodded and sat down on the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that completely caught me off guard. "You were right to leave." I blinked in surprise. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "When you told me the company was taking over your life, I realized something uncomfortable," he said. "It's taking over mine too." That was the first time I saw the man not as a powerful CEO, but as a human being, and suddenly he looked exhausted. Marcus explained that in the years since founding the company, he had lost almost everything outside of it. His marriage had quietly fallen apart. His friendships had faded. His world had shrunk to conference rooms and financial reports. The company had become his entire identity. "And when you walked away," he said quietly, "I started wondering if I built something incredible or something broken." The room felt heavy with the honesty of his words. I didn't know what to say. Finally, he stood and walked toward the small window overlooking the street. "Ryan," he said slowly, "do you know why I came here tonight?" I shook my head. "Because the company needs people who remember what life outside those walls looks like." He turned back toward me. "I want you to come back," he said. My heart immediately sank. I had just escaped that life. But before I could respond, he raised a hand gently. "Not to the same job," he added. Then he told me something I never expected. Marcus wanted to rebuild the culture of the company from the inside out. He wanted to create departments focused on employee well-being, reasonable work schedules, and actual balance between career and life. And he wanted someone who had experienced burnout firsthand to help lead it. "You walked away when others were too afraid to," he said. "That tells me you see things clearly." I sat there in silence, trying to process what he was asking. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately, but another part of me remembered Olivia's tired smile, Kevin's long hours, and the dozens of coworkers who quietly struggled the same way I had. Maybe the company didn't need another executive. Maybe it needed someone who remembered what it felt like to almost lose themselves. The decision took days. I walked through parks, called my parents, and spent long hours thinking about what kind of life I wanted. Finally, I called Marcus Whitaker. I told him I would return. But only under one condition. Things had to change, not just on paper, but in reality. To my surprise, he agreed without hesitation. 6 months later, Whitaker Industries felt like a completely different place. Flexible schedules replaced endless late nights. Wellness programs and counseling services became part of the company culture. Managers were trained to recognize burnout before it destroyed people. Some executives resisted at first, but Marcus stood firm, and slowly the change began to spread. One evening, as I walked out of the building after a normal 8-hour day, a concept that once seemed impossible, I saw Marcus standing in the lobby. He looked around at employees leaving with smiles instead of exhaustion. "You know," he said quietly, "for the first time in years, this place feels alive." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories like this. And before the story ends, I have a special request for you. In the comments, write the word second chance. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't staying, it's walking away. And sometimes the most powerful thing someone else can do is knock on your door and ask you to help build something better. Marcus Whitaker came to my apartment that night believing I had left his company behind. But in truth, we had both left something else behind too. A way of living that forgot people matter more than success. And sometimes the future doesn't start in a boardroom. Sometimes it starts with a knock on a quiet apartment door.